Welcome to Arab Talk 2022. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. I'm Jess Jamal.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, happy 2022. Welcome back. We're going to be hearing about your Omicron update from your travels overseas. We'll be talking about that. We want to wish our Arab Talk listeners and viewers a healthy and safe 2022. We have a lot to cover. We've had a little bit of a break because of holiday and Omicron and things like that. But we're back, and we're back for another exciting year of Arab Talk in 2022. We're very excited to be back in the studio with everybody. We're still in the middle of a year two, Jamal, and another pandemic. And so one of the big things we'll be talking about today is year two pandemic going into year three, Omicron, and the state of affairs. We're also going to be talking about, which I think is our lead story, Jamal, which in my mind is, really disturbing, is the ongoing systematic and systemic ethnic cleansing that the apartheid regime of Israel is currently, as we speak, exercising against indigenous Palestinian communities throughout historic Palestine. I mean, it always happens this time of the year, as you and I have been talking about for many, many years now. Every change of administration, or during a downtime like an epidemic, or during the holidays, the apartheid regime amps up its ethnic cleansing, land theft, especially. That's what we're going to talk about today, is land theft. And, it's again, a devastating time for Palestinians in historic Palestine. And then we should just kind of year in review 2021, what's going to be happening in 2022. So let's kick it off, man. Welcome back.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right, Jess. Israel, or the Israeli leadership, they always think that people have short-term memory and they are distracted. And they are distracted this year with Omicron and everything else that is going. So we know every few months they bomb Gaza, or they try to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from around Jerusalem, like the neighborhood we spoke about, Sheikh Jarrah. And now their newest target, and I wouldn't call it newest, it's not so new target,
It's not new.
is the Naqab desert, or
Right.
they refer to it as the Negev desert, is to try to get rid of the Palestinian Bedouins who lived there and roamed the land for centuries, Jess.
Centuries. Yeah.
Under the pretext of forestation project. This is the word they use, that they actually, it is funded by the Jewish Fund, one of the funders, and they've done that in different places all around Palestine, where they plant trees. In the case outside, for example, Jerusalem, and that's why I say this forestation buzzword that they use does not sit pretty with Palestinians, because they've heard that before. So now, the Naqab is a desert by and large, and you have different Bedouin communities and families who lived there forever, right? And just
Right.
think about, they lived there when there were no borders, traveled throughout
That's right.
the Middle East. For years, Israel has been trying to house them in some sort of tenements, settle them, basically. These are nomadic tribes. They don't want to settle in towns and cities. They've chosen the life of the desert. And so they've been trying always to force them to do that. And every few years we
right.
hear or we see a flare-up, and they beat them, they arrest them, they attack them. And of course, Israel imposes recruitment. They recruit their men to serve in the military, that's another topic. So this time, under this pretext of forestation, they've been trying to displace this whole community, and this whole tribe, and saying that we basically we want to turn this is an area near the Al Atrash Sawa intersection on Route 31, just for people who are not familiar with that. They said that they have a project of forestation, the resumption of tree planting work by the Jewish National Fund.
Right, right.
Now, we've seen that work because why is it this forestation projects? What they mean, transferring some of the land into public parks. And we've seen them around Jerusalem where Lifta, for example, the entire ethnically cleansed village of Lifta and others, many others, you see the old remnants. And what they do, I mean, here is the irony of it all, just on top of, pouring salt on the wound. I don't know about what they're going to do in the Naqab, but in general, around Jerusalem, they plant European imported pine trees. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Not even indigenous, not olive trees, not things that... It's European imported pine trees, which, by the way, if people follow the news, a couple of years ago, we had a big fire around Jerusalem. And that's where the fire happened when they had drought. That was the first thing that went on fire, because as you know, olive trees are very resilient, kind of like in compared to California, to our redwoods versus the regular trees. So as soon, of course, the community heard that, Al-Atrash, in the Al-Atrash area, they've been demonstrating, and Israel been arresting them, beating women and children, causing a big, brouhaha in the Knesset, because there were people who supported, we are the government, we do this. And of course, other Palestinian, Israeli representatives are against it. And so they've been demonstrating with the Bedouins.
Well, Jamal, this is an old story. This is old wine in new bottles. And the other angle, which, the apartheid regime is playing is, this is under greenwashing their ethnic cleansing, because what they want to say is that we're replanting, this is part of that old kind of crazy narrative of making the desert bloom again. So under the false guise of greenwashing, under the guise of forestation, the real goal here, of course, is this long plan to ethnically cleanse and remove these indigenous communities, as you say, Jamal, that have been there for centuries and centuries and centuries. But bad news for the apartheid regime, Jamal. We've reported on this for many years now. Every time they try to uproot these Palestinian Bedouins, they come back and reestablish their presence on their land. And they will continue to do this. The unfortunate thing here is that it's going to displace families, communities, children, temporarily yet again. It's going to, be a tremendous stress and trauma on these communities who repeatedly by the apartheid regime are forced to, not be able to claim their rightful place on their land. And, I can't stop talking about the timing of this, Jamal. I'm really, this is the typical Israeli ploy. Not only are they greenwashing, but they're doing it at a time when there's an epidemic of Omicron, which we should talk a little bit about the apartheid regime's response to that. There's all these other things going on in the world, that the United States and other allies to the United States have their mind on, whether it's Ukraine or Russia or Omicron, whatever. And they've taken their eye off the ball of repeated Israeli attacks on indigenous communities. By the way, and I have to say this, I'm so sorry to say this reminded me of one of the, as long as we're speaking of Israeli ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, truly one of the amazing voices of justice for Palestine and for all displaced and oppressed people in the world is the beloved Desmond Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu. He passed away while we were taking our little break from Arab Talk. Unequivocally throughout the world, wherever you were on the political spectrum, he was universally celebrated by the left, the right, the middle,
And
by
justifiably so.
yeah, the devout, the non-devout. He is universally loved in the world, except in one place, Jamal. And with the
I'll have to say one place plus one.
one place plus one, yeah, the one
Or
place,
someone who speaks on behalf of this one
place.
which is Israel, which is Alan Dershowitz.
Yeah, exactly, Jamal. That's my point. So at a time when the entire world, from Obama to Angela Merkel to people throughout the African continent, were celebrating Desmond Tutu, you had this one voice, among others in the apartheid regime, Alan Dershowitz, having the audacity within a time of mourning the loss of this great man, calling Desmond Tutu a historic anti-Semite, and kind of denigrating this truly heroic man committed to justice. It just pained me to, even though I know Dershowitz, this is his MO. I mean, he is plagued by immorality. This is the same guy who allegedly was on these junkets with underage teenage girls with Jeffrey Epstein.
And I have to defend him. He says that he kept his underwear on.
Yes, he kept his underwear on, of course.
That's what
and
he says.
He defended
when he
Donald
was getting his massages, by the way.
Right, and he was defending Donald Trump at a time when Donald Trump was being universally condemned for his and impeached. And Dershowitz was one of Trump's steadfast defenders. So here we have this defender of Epstein, this defender of Donald Trump, defender of the apartheid regime of Israel, denigrating a heroic figure like Bishop Desmond Tutu. Even while the body was still warm, Jamal, after Desmond Tutu's passing, you had Alan Dershowitz writing and calling him a historic anti-Semite. And we're going to come back to that because there's been more examples of that. We're going to talk a little bit about that later in the show today. With
on the same topic, Jess, we might as well talk about what happened to exactly. Yeah. So here is a very famous actor, best known for playing Hermione Granger in the Harry Potter franchise. Right. Was accused, the same thing, of anti-Semitism after she posted an image on Instagram showing a photograph of a pro-Palestinian protest with the banner, "Solidarity is a verb," written across it. Right?
Yeah, that's her message, Jamal. Solidarity is a verb. Yeah. That was her message.
That was her message. And she, of course, came under immediate attack. Initially by Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, first by Danny Danon, the former science minister in Benjamin Netanyahu's government and Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, who said 10 points of Gry Finder for being an anti-Semite. Then Israel current, of course, ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, said, "Fiction may work in Harry Potter, but it does not work in reality." I want to know whose reality he's talking about. This is what he's saying. Fiction may work in Harry. In other words, he lives in, his reality is that apartheid does not exist in Israel when Israel was named as an apartheid state by Human Rights Watch and by its own human rights organization, B'Tselem. So who's fiction? He lives in fiction, really.
Right, but I think it's important. Emma Watson, Jamal, is one of the most talented, beloved actors in the world today. I mean, she's just an extraordinary actor. And what's interesting, after she made this post on Instagram, and it's important for our viewers and listeners to understand, she had a quote from an intersectional feminist, solidarity is a verb. It's from an intersectional feminist activist, and a photo of Palestinian, basically a protest involving Palestinians and Palestinian supporters. So she got vilified by the typical suspects, the Hasbara attack, which was, if you read the attacks, they're completely ridiculous. Of course, they have nothing to do with the reality of what she was trying to say.
And they demean the memory of those who actually suffered
Exactly.
During
Horrible
the Holocaust
anti-Semitism.
and because of horrible anti-Semitism that you just,
But
throw that word on anyone who criticizes Israeli atrocities.
Right. But here's interesting. When people get accused of anti-Semitism, I mean, of course, moral shame again on Alan Dershowitz for criticizing a person who's deceased. But in this case, with Emma Watson, it's very different, Jamal, because the Hollywood community came out in support of her statement and support of her and support of her solidarity with Palestinians and Palestinian self-determination. She has been, I mean, of course, we say this, Jamal, the apartheid regime never misses an opportunity to shoot itself in the foot. So they gave more airtime to the statement. It brought out more support for Palestinian self-determination and human rights and has called out the apartheid regime even more. So there's a silver lining here because now you have the entirety of the Hollywood community, and maybe not everybody.
And also, we should mention major figures in the Hollywood community major figures from the world of film, including Susan Sarandon, Mark Ruffalo, Peter Capaldi, and Charles Dance. They all issued a statement in support of Emma Watson and Palestinian solidarity. And I should just say here that in a letter, there was the letter that submitted by these artists. I'm just quoting some of its wording here. Standing together for Palestinian rights. More than 40 named people, including the ones I named, including also adding to that Gail Garcia Bernal, Jim Jarmusch, Maxine Peake, bunch of whole name. We join Emma Watson in support of the simple statement that solidarity is a verb, including meaningful solidarity with Palestinians' struggle for their human rights under international law. Citing a report by Human Rights Watch claiming Israel is committing the crimes of apartheid and persecution, the artists, including Watson's Harry Potter co-stars Miriam Margolyes and Julie Christie, continued, we recognize the underlying power imbalance between Israel, the occupying power, and the Palestinians, the people under a system of military occupation and apartheid. We stand against ongoing Israeli attempts to forcibly displace Palestinian families from their homes in East Jerusalem neighborhoods of Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory. That's pretty strong, Jess.
No, that's a strong statement. That's why, Jamal, this is what I say to all of the Israeli Hasbaras who attacked Emma Watson, who attacked Desmond Tutu. Keep bringing it on. Keep attacking these heroic figures, whether they're alive or have passed on. The level of your immorality to condemn these people just brings more oxygen and more light to the darkness of Israeli apartheid and oppression. And, when we talk about 2022, Jamal, I think one of the things we have to talk about is the fact that the international community pulling together with the likes of Emma Watson and the memory of Desmond Tutu, the calling out of the Israeli aggression and apartheid will only increase. And I think this is going to be an extraordinary year, 2022, for the BDS movement, for Palestine solidarity. So keep making these outrageous statements. They can't contain themselves, Jamal. That's what's so beautiful about this. People make these, we know that these are strong statements, but they are not outrageous statements to say solidarity is a verb. It's not outrageous to say that. It's not anti-Semitic to say that. It's not anything to say other than we commit ourselves to human rights and self-determination, not just for Palestinians, but for all oppressed people. And if the apartheid leaders want to attack that, you know what I say? Bring it on. You're just going to call more attention to the ethnic cleansing that you're doing and to your apartheid practices. So I think it's great. I think it's a win. It's a definitely a win-win. Anytime someone of this stature, like Emma Watson, is able to make a statement like that, and we hear these ridiculous comments of anti-Semitism coming out from the Hasbaristas, it's bring it on. What can I say, Jamal?
Well, here's the thing, Jess. They're also aware. I mean, aside from their ridiculous attempts to shine and to whitewash and the greenwash and pinkwash, they know that they are not making any headway. That's why it is a priority. This is
Right.
something that was actually published in Haaretz based on the cabinet that 2022, because we're talking about what's going to be coming ahead in 2022, that it is a priority for them to fight the label of apartheid. This is which this is a priority for the Israeli government to fight the label of apartheid, because they think that's going to be an uptick of labeling Israel as an... I don't know what you mean labeling. I mean, you're talking about human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and their own findings, their own human rights organization. But somehow they think that there is a campaign to pin the word apartheid on Israel. Like, again, this is the part of burying their heads in the sand, just and so they're putting a lot of effort and a lot of finances. And there was a meeting that happened between, of course, the Israeli ambassador, etc., with AIPAC here to counter it in, the country that they counted as the most important country, which is the United States. So this is, when we're talking about this is what's going to be happening.
I think it's great, Jamal. They're going to do the Sheldon Edelson thing. They're going to dump billions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars into this campaign. And the only thing that it will do is show more people how immoral, illegal the apartheid regime of Israel is. It's just going to bring more light to the darkness that the Israeli regime is bringing to the region. And I say, great, you want to spend your money on bringing more light to, your apartheid practices, bring it on. Because there's no counter, Jamal. If you call Desmond Tutu and Emma Watson anti-Semites, you've got nothing else. You've got nothing else in your quiver, right? You've got nothing else to say. There's nothing else you can bring to the table but to call Desmond Tutu among the most beloved and revered people on the planet. To call him an anti-Semite means that you've reached the depths of despair and immorality that only an apologist for an apartheid would make, Jamal. So I'm glad that they're going to be wasting their money on it.
And these are desperate times for the desperate Israeli government, because like you've mentioned, no matter what they do, the truth comes out. Okay, so they can try to attack BDS, they can try to attack different celebrities for calling Israel for what it is, but they cannot even answer to their own media and their own things, archives and whatever that is being released. I don't know if, again, to remind our listeners, just early this year, just a technical error on Israel State Archive website has revealed that a prominent Israeli politician said in 1948 that he could forgive instances of rape committed against a Palestinian woman in violence that preceded the founding of the Israeli state. Of course, that media is Haaretz. And so now, because of a technical error, all the hidden facts that Israel tries to keep came out in detail, detailing how the Zionists at the time, before the establishment of Israel, had what Palestinians have been talking about for ages, and how what historians have been talking about, like Ilan Pappé, etc., had a plan to ethnically cleanse and Palestinians. But this is their own archive. This is their own archive, Jess.
Well, Well, Jamal, I think, that's why, and I know this sounds, I'm not sure how it comes across in light of everything that's happening in the world right now, but I know that what Palestinians are facing now is formidable when it comes to so many things, including the ethnic cleansing, the theft of land, the occupation. But I remain so optimistic because, and you've heard me say this, when you're running a marathon, because this is not a sprint, but when you're running a marathon and overcoming Israeli apartheid is a marathon, I do believe that 2022 is going to be a really important year for that race because it started off with Desmond Tutu, bless his soul, really for everything. He did this in the 90s, Jamal, when it wasn't popular to support Palestine, and people like Emma Watson. This is just going to flourish in 2022 with support of BDS and confronting the apartheid practices. So as long as we're talking about 2022, I think that this is going to be yet another important year for Palestine solidarity. I don't think, however, it's going to be a good year for Palestinians living on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, or those Palestinians living in 48. And I say this because Israeli medical apartheid continues to be practiced, Jamal. And so we're the only ones really talking about this, but when the Israelis are celebrated for their vaccination plan, they're leaving out 50% of the data. Mm-hmm. So when they talk about 80% of the people or 85% of the people being vaccinated, they're leaving out 50% of the population because it's simply not true that many people are vaccinated, because Israel continues to practice medical apartheid because it continues to fail at distributing the vaccines equitably across all sectors of Palestinian society. And Palestinians continue to be second and third class citizens when it comes to access to vaccines, as well as what's happening with Delta and Omicron and the COVID pandemic. So,
but then again, they're in denial about this, and I want us to talk about it. But first, quickly, Jess.
Yes.
I wanna read about these documents quickly because in the documents reveal that the founder of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, the man who became the first prime minister,
right,
said that, and this is, I'm quoting here in the same meetings, that some Palestinian villages must be wiped out because they constitute a great danger to the future state. So again, this is their own words, their own archives. And that's why I think what you're saying, you are a big believer that the truth will prevail, eventually will prevail.
Absolutely.
And they've been trying to hide the truth for ages.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jamal, because what happens is that light is the best disinfectant against lies and attempts to hide the truth. And the Israelis have been operating by not wanting to shine a light on the truth, by keeping the truth away from any disinfectant. And so that's what I think 2022 is very important, because the archives, the so-called technical errors are coming out. More and more people will be joining the BDS movement. There is a groundswell of support for Palestine solidarity across the world. And, we talked about this in the political context. Benjamin Netanyahu's having a bad year, even worse than Donald Trump, I would say. Benjamin Netanyahu is getting his political butt kicked in a big way. He is dropped away from the scenes of the political establishment in the apartheid regime, and he's facing a lot of legal trouble, as we know. But the Israelis, including Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis, were the only ones supporting Donald Trump internationally, Jamal. And we find that Israel stands at the fringe of supporting the most oppressive regimes in the world, stands at the fringe of celebrating apartheid and oppression, and it, as the light gets shown on them again this year, it will continue to erode. And, they're going to continue to throw money away. and here's their tactic, Jamal, you know this tactic. They're just going to call everybody an anti-Semite. So the entire world will become anti-Semitic, and they'll use that to justify the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So this is going to be a very important year, 2022. And I think we're seeing the beginning of it. Desmond Tutu, Emma Watson, and we're bound to see this growing in 2022. But remember, I say that in the context of it's going to be a very tough year for Palestinians on the ground. More land will be stolen. More Palestinian children and women will be killed, will be imprisoned, will be tortured. There'll be more land theft, as we know. There'll be more bombings in Gaza. So this is the pretext that the Israelis will use to continue their campaign. So it's going to be a good year and a bad year at the same time.
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. On the same topic, Jess, we started talking about the Omicron and COVID and the medical apartheid, because we were talking about medical apartheid way before, if you remember.
A year ago, Jamal, a year and a half ago.
We're talking about it. And recently, Israel has been receiving all the accolades and praises that it's got everything under control, and it's the experimental playground for whatever, Pfizer, etc., vaccines. Yeah. And they put restrictions to travel on countries, including the United States, because the United States is a red country. And with the exception, which, by the way, we've talked about that, unless you're Jewish, you could enter. Palestinians, you cannot, and others. So we've talked about that as far as apartheid. But recently now, guess what? They removed that restriction because they are a red country.
They are a red country. Yeah. That's
so
the
now
thing,
the restriction
Jamal.
has been removed because with all, what's happening there, Omicron, the spread of Omicron and COVID has not stopped.
Well, the reason it hasn't stopped, Jamal, and let me just let our listeners and viewers know, there are a lot of reasons that go into that. But there are 30 countries in the world where the infection rate is below 10%. In California today, where we're broadcasting, it's 23 to 24%, which puts you into the red category. So despite the Israeli claim, and I will say a claim because it hasn't been empirically proven or justified yet, claim of being this model of vaccination, the reason the Israeli apartheid regime is now a red state is because country is because they haven't vaccinated the people they said they vaccinated. And as I said earlier in the show, they want to claim an 85% vaccination rate. But if you include everybody between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea, less than 50% of people are vaccinated. So if you look at the reality of the situation, because guess what, Jamal? Omicron does not understand the apartheid wall. It doesn't understand borders. It doesn't understand soldiers with guns and tanks. It didn't work because the apartheid regime failed to vaccinate over 50% of the people living in historic Palestine. That's the real story. That's why it's back in the red zone, and that's why they will never, ever get this under control. So that's the consequence of medical apartheid in the apartheid state.
That's right. And you're talking about more than 600,000 Israeli settlers living in the West Bank alone.
Correct.
This is in the heart of the West Bank,
exactly,
where Palestinians have a very, very low vaccination. I think recently they received some shipments from China and from Russia, but nothing near what Israel has received, in terms of Pfizer.
Right.
So you have 600,000 plus settlers. And these settlers on a daily basis travel from the West Bank into Tel Aviv and into the heart of Jerusalem, etc.
Every day.
And then Palestinians have to go through checkpoints manned by Israeli soldiers, and they're always arresting young Palestinians, chasing after them. So, as you said, I mean, that apartheid wall that they've built is not going to stop the Omicron, and there is no real separation. I mean, there is political separation, but not separation in the population because the proximity.
Right. But Mike, why isn't this being picked? This is your area of expertise, Jamal, in terms of media coverage. No one is really reporting on the failure of the apartheid state, the Israeli state, the failure of them to get Omicron under control for medical apartheid.
Because the numbers, as you said, they are deceiving. When you are talking about Israel, if you're talking about the 6.5 million Jewish Israelis, or, that's one story. Or if you want to talk about everyone who lives on the land that Israel really controls, regardless. Don't tell me about Ramallah under the Palestinian Authority, wherever. They're in control of the land, historic Palestine between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, maybe with the exception from exterior of Gaza, because Gazans aren't allowed to travel.
But Jamal, it's even worse than that. That's absolutely right. But listen, the Israelis denied Pfizer they wouldn't allow Pfizer to send vaccines to the...
Not only this, but remember when they had expiring Pfizer vaccines, they wanted to send those to the Palestinians and get new ones in return. By the way, Israelis now are receiving their fourth shot.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting about that.
And still they have a problem.
Right. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds about this from a science point of view, but even scientists in the United States, which have typically given a lot of deference to the Israeli statistics, which I found really problematic, are saying, hey, we're not close to a fourth. There's the data that the Israelis are showing do not support at all the idea of giving a fourth booster shot. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest, Jamal, and we need to be careful about this, that a fourth booster shot may actually not be helpful for people and may actually work against you. So you can overboost. You can over jack up your immune system.
You will weaken it, right?
Yeah. Well, to make it more compromised to the point that you might make you more vulnerable to being infected. So the Israelis are operating in a science world that is not governed by the rules of science that we have in the United States and in Europe and in other parts of the world. So the Israelis are what I call cowboy medicine and cowboy science. They're telling people, get a fourth booster, but the evidence for it, Jamal, is really not that good. And by the way, while they're giving some Israeli citizens a fourth booster shot, again, you have large percentages of Palestinians who have not received any vaccine.
Exactly. They haven't received any.
So what does it tell you that some people, that's what apartheid is, when one group is privileged over another who share the same land. And so you have Israelis who are getting a fourth booster and Palestinians who aren't getting access to any. If that's not immoral and apartheid medicine, I don't know what is. But, and I said this last year, Jamal, the Israelis aren't very bright. They're just not that bright. They think that they could stop the Omicron or Delta or whatever virus and just keep their little island protected from the COVID pandemic, and they're completely wrong. Even with
you mentioned something. It crossed my mind because Israel historically has maintained a garrison state. That's the mentality that the Israelis have, and perhaps what you're alluding to, they want to create a garrison state against COVID, and that's not working. You see, garrison, because they think they can create a garrison state, and with American technology and weapons, they can protect their population, and they're using the same mentality with COVID.
Yes, and guess what? Breaking news: it doesn't work, and it won't work. And in fact, because they're now giving a fourth, the problem is that this is cowboy science and medicine. It's going to work against them. They may over-vaccinate one part of the population, but you're leaving over 50% of the population with no vaccines. It will continue to spread and mutate. And as I predicted, this is one of my predictions from 2021 that came true, the Israeli regime is not able to avoid the COVID pandemic. In fact, it may become one of the worst places on the planet because of their failure to vaccinate enough people. So we'll be following that story very close, Jamal, because it's unlikely that the pandemic, because of Omicron, is going to go away anytime soon. I mean, the idea is that we go from a pandemic to an endemic. And what that means is when you're in a pandemic, you want to do everything you can to vaccinate people, mask up, and prevent from being vaccinated. And endemic means you've got it somewhat under control and you just kind of live with it with, basic mitigation
like
strategies.
influenza is endemic, right? The flu.
Like flu, exactly. Like the common cold, all of those things.
I wanna on this topic. I wanna move us locally here to the States because, as you know, I've been traveling, and I'm really surprised that the issue, talking about testing. I keep, monitoring the news, every single news report. There is a whole segment about testing. Biden saying every home is going to receive their testing kits in I don't know how many days and so forth. And then I come here, you go to the local pharmacy,
can't find
and
it.
they have a big sign at the local pharmacy, and I'm not going to name them just to be kind, saying we don't have the test, whatever. Don't even ask. That's what they have. Don't even. I mean, I was like, what? Don't even. And the reason I went to do that, because as you know, I traveled from overseas. I was tested before I boarded the plane, 24 hours. Thank God I was negative. Boarded the plane, came here, and I said, okay, well, now I had this 18 hours flying, long flight from Europe to DC and from DC to here. I should test myself just in case.
Yeah.
I couldn't find a testing
and
kit.
Jamal, you won't find it. And this is an example of a complete failure of the United States.
So when I boarded, before I boarded the plane, I boarded from Charles de Gaulle in Paris, Jess, and the United States requires that you produce a negative test, either a PCR or an antigen test, 24 hours. I had 24 hours. It took me no time. I walked out of my hotel exactly half a block. There was a pharmacy, and the pharmacy had a tent. And guess what? Because I wanted to make sure that this was available. Every single block had the same story: a pharmacy with a white tent outside with three health employees. If you are a French citizen, you just tell them, I guess, your social security card, you get the test for free. If you're a foreigner, you pay for it. 30 euros, you get your results, preliminary results in 15 minutes.
And that, by the way, Jamal, that's what most of Europe is doing.
And the full results, you get them under an hour, a PDF file, and you upload it to the airlines, and they can tell you are travel ready or not. So I returned here. I went to my local pharmacy, not one, two. They don't have it.
You won't find it, Jamal. And you won't find it because our response, and we are equal opportunity critics of any party, Democrat, Republican, middle, left, right, left, it doesn't matter to us. And I will say clearly and unequivocally that the Biden administration has failed from a public health standpoint on their COVID response. They failed to be clear on their messaging. They failed to be clear on getting enough, testing out. They failed on the policies of allowing people to either go back to work or not go back to work. They failed on the policies of, different masks to wear. Even the Supreme Court has failed this country. And we still, if you can believe it, Jamal, only 62% of people in this country have been vaccinated. And that's only with 2 shots. I'm not talking about boosted.
Don't you think it's embarrassing to ask people who are traveling to the United States that they need to produce test results within 24 hours when in our own country we cannot get that?
Well, that's what's happening, Jamal. People who are in this country who want to travel back to their country of origin, or citizens who want to go and travel can't find the test to leave. So a lot of people are actually stuck in the United States because they can't find a way within that 24-hour window to get tested. It's an embarrassment, Jamal. And I'll say that even though the Biden administration, starting this Wednesday, you'll be able to go online and order the self-test, the antigen test, and have it sent to you. It won't even be sent to you for 2 weeks. By 2 weeks, Jamal, we most likely will have been peaked. By that time, most likely it'll be too late. And
I should just tell our listeners and viewers that I feel just all right. But even with that, I'm self-quarantining, so I'm not going out here, there, wherever, to make sure for the next week.
You should. I think that, but
because
you're responsible. But you're a responsible person,
and I can't get a test, so I'm just doing my own kind of scientific answer to this. Is like make sure like you're okay for a week before you even come in contact with anyone else.
But we shouldn't have to live like this. There's so many things wrong with the American response and with the Biden administration. And I've said this for 2 years now, Jamal. The fact that almost 40% of Americans only have 2 shots, not even fully, less than 20% or around 20% have been boosted, means that our ability to go from pandemic to endemic is going to be extended. Right now, as we speak, Jamal, the average daily rate for the last 7 days of infections in the United States is 820,000 people. 2,000 people a day are dying every day in the United States from COVID. There's
Part of our prediction, I'm not going to even ask you this, so 2022, we're going to keep talking about COVID. It's not going to go away. We're not going to be out of the pandemic era.
I don't see that we're going to go to pandemic to endemic within the first 6 months, Jamal, just by the fact that it continues to be politically divided between you still have extreme Republicans and even mainstream Republicans who are not vaccinated, who don't believe in it, who don't believe COVID is a big deal. We're going to continue to fall well below that 80% that we need for fully vaccinated population to move closer from pandemic to endemic. The only way we'll truly get to endemic is if we get closer to that 80% of people who are fully vaccinated.
Well, what if everyone who is not fully vaccinated gets Omicron, and so how will that change?
Well, here's the thing. This is the thing that's interesting. People, again, this is part of the right-wing propaganda, think that the best way to protect yourself is just to get Omicron and then you're protected. Well, all the data is showing that you can be multiply infected. You can be infected more than one time. You can get sick more than one time. And here's the other bad news. If you get infected, and you're unvaccinated, the likelihood of it mutating and then you giving it to somebody else increases dramatically. So the idea that somehow everybody's going to get it and we'll get to herd immunity is not a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination. Most people that I talk to, and because I work at UCSF and I have contact with some of the best scientists in the world on this stuff, I'll say many, if not most people have pretty dark, gloomy predictions about the next 3 to 4 months, Jamal. I'm not optimistic about it at all.
Well, I know you have never been, but I've been seeing the results with my own eyes. And I have to say, even though I was, part of my trip, in Europe and in France, and it's also spreading there, as you know, it's spreading all over the world. But somehow I felt more secure,
of course,
because they had a system, and the system is,
of course,
A, you can get tested, B, you cannot enter anywhere without showing the pass sanitaire, and you have to get it from the French government. Right. You cannot ride a train, right. You cannot go to a museum, you cannot go to a restaurant, and everybody abided by this. And starting today, January, basically in mid-January, the government is changing the pass sanitaire to I guess pass vaccinaire, where you have to show that you have the 3 shots, the 2 shots and the booster, to maintain that status. So at least I felt they have had the system in place here. Every day there is something new, you know.
Well, there's something new. There's not a consistent policy. You don't have access to testing, and you have this crazy segment of our population that doesn't believe in science, Jamal, that still believes that it's not a big deal. And I can't even tell you how devastating it is to hear from my colleagues who tell me that the number of children that are being hospitalized and dying right now is like 200 to 300% greater than it was last year during Delta. So Omicron is infecting more children. Large numbers of children are infected and are getting sick. So, you know, this idea in this country that, we think we know better than science, and, you know, we believe Joe Rogan and Ron DeSantis, but we're not going to believe Tony Fauci, that crazy mentality in this country that we have, because it's so politically divided, means that more kids are going to get sick, more kids are going to die, and that our ability to get to the endemic side of this is going to take a lot longer. So, and the longer we wait, the greater probability that there is of a new variant coming out. And if a new variant comes out, there's no guarantee that it'll be less harmful than Omicron. So I'm not optimistic, but I think, in a very selfish way, Jamal, where we live in Northern California, we'll probably do a little bit better than the rest of the country because our vaccination rates are so high. But let's not fool ourselves. I mean, you know, San Francisco and the hospitals in the greater Bay Area are really struggling right now. Why are they struggling? There may be enough beds, but so many doctors and nurses are sick right now. We don't have the staff to actually help people. So I'm glad you're at home, because this is not a time to get into a car accident. It's not a time to get sick. It's not a time to have a heart attack. This is not a good time, because if you need health care now, even in the Bay Area, you're not going to get the care that you really need or deserve.
We have a couple of minutes left, Jess. How badly is this going to reflect on the midterm elections for the Democrats?
Well, we'll talk about this next week, Jamal, but I have bad news in terms of my predictions for 2022. The Democrats are going to lose the House, and they're going to lose the Senate in 2022. That's my prediction for this year. The Biden agenda is already sunk, but I don't know what's worse than getting sunk, but Biden is going to be essentially a lame duck for 2 years. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, y'all got to get ready for Donald Trump 2.0. I'm just saying, y'all got to get ready for Donald Trump 2.0, because in 2004, there's a greater than 50-50 chance that Donald Trump is going to be your president again. So this is the dark part of the predictions. But I could say with pretty good confidence that the Democrats are going to lose the House and the Senate. I'm pretty confident about that.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest episodes, and we will talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week, and Happy New Year.